Hi, everyone. I'm DeMarco Morgan. We want to play for you right now a press briefing held by the new White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. He did not take questions. Instead, he attacked the media for what he says is, quote, deliberately false reporting about the Trump administration and particularly about the size of the crowd at President Trump's inauguration. It was very unusual. Let's listen in.
Good evening. Thank you guys for coming. I know our first official press briefing is going to be on Monday, but I wanted to give you a few updates on the president's activities. But before I get to the news of the day, I think I'd like to discuss a little bit of the coverage of the past 24 hours. Yesterday, at a time when our nation and the world was watching the peaceful transition of power, and as the president said, the transition and the balance of power from Washington to the citizens of the United States, some members of the media were engaged in deliberately false reporting. For all the talk about the proper use of Twitter, two instances yesterday stand out. One was a particularly egregious example in which a reporter falsely tweeted out that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. had been removed from the Oval Office. After it was pointed out that this was just plain wrong, the reporter casually reported and tweeted out and tried to claim that a Secret Service agent must have just been standing in front of it. This was irresponsible and reckless. Secondly, photographs of the inaugural proceedings were intentionally framed in a way, in one particular tweet, to minimize the enormous support that had gathered on the National Mall. This was the first time in our nation's history that floor coverings have been used to protect the grass in the mall. That had the effect of highlighting any areas where people were not standing, while in years past, the grass eliminated this visual. This was also the first time that fencing and magnetometers went as far back on the wall, preventing hundreds of thousands of people from being able to access the mall as quickly as they had in inaugurations past. Inaccurate numbers involving crowd size were also tweeted. No one had numbers because the National Park Service, which controls the National Mall, does not put any out. By the way, this applies to any attempts to try to count the number of protesters today in the same fashion. We do know a few things, so let's go through the facts. We know that from the platform where the president was sworn in to 4th Street holds about 250,000 people. From 4th Street to the media tent is about another 220,000. And from the media tent to the Washington Monument, another 250,000 people. All of this space was full when the president took the oath of office. We know that 420,000 people used the D.C. Metro public transit yesterday, which actually compares to 317,000 that used it for President Obama's last inaugural. This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. Even the New York Times printed a photograph showing that a misrepresentation of the crowd in the original tweet in their paper, which showed the full extent of the support, depth, and crowd and intensity that existed. These attempts to lessen the enthusiasm of the inauguration are shameful and wrong. The president was also at the Central, as you know, the president was at the Central Intelligence Agency today and greeted by a raucous overflow crowd of some 400 plus CIA employees. There were over 1,000 requests to attend, prompting the president to note that he'll have to come back to greet the rest. The employees were ecstatic that he's the new commander-in-chief, and he delivered them a powerful and important message. He told them he has their back, and they were grateful for that. They gave him a 5-minute standing ovation at the end in a display of their patriotism and their enthusiasm for his presidency. I'd also note that it's a shame that the CIA didn't have a CIA director to be with him today when he visited, because the Democrats have chosen, Senate Democrats are stalling the nomination of Mike Pompeo and playing politics with national security. That's what you guys should be writing and covering. That this, instead of sowing division about tweets and false narratives, the president is committed to unifying our country, and that was the focus of his inaugural address. This kind of dishonesty in the media, the challenging that bringing about our nation together is making it more difficult. There's been a lot of talk in the media about the responsibility to hold Donald Trump accountable. And I'm here to tell you that it goes two ways. We're going to hold the press accountable as well. The American people deserve better, and as long as he serves as the messenger for this incredible movement, he will take his message directly to the American people, where his focus will always be. And with that, a few other updates from the day. The president had a constructive conversation with Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada about strengthening the relationship between our two nations. They also discussed setting up additional meetings in the days to come, which we will follow up on. He also spoke to Prime Minister Peña Nieto of Mexico and talked about a visit on trade, immigration, and security that will occur on the 31st. The president will welcome his first foreign leader this Thursday when the United Kingdom's Theresa May will come to Washington on Friday. On tomorrow, the president will oversee his assistants to the president being sworn in. He will then, the staff will then have an ethics briefing and be a briefing on the proper use and handling of classified information. Further updates as far as what he will do. Oh, and then in the evening, he will have a reception for law enforcement and first responders that helped support the inauguration. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I will see you on Monday.
I want to bring in Major Garrett and just get your thoughts on what Spicer had to say. Major?
Well, first of all, DeMarco, I would not describe this as a White House briefing because Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, took no questions. He did give a blistering statement to the media saying it had inaccurately reported the crowd sizes at the inauguration yesterday and quibbled with other reporting about the president in the Oval Office yesterday. There was an erroneous report that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. had been removed from the Oval Office. In fact, it had not been. And Sean Spicer came out to sort of give the media a very stern warning, talking about accountability, that this administration and this president is going to fire back at reporters and the media if ever it comes across what it considers to be inaccurate or unfair reporting. And then he also talked about the president's trip to the CIA, glossing over entirely the weeks of, first of all, doubts cast by the president-elect about the verifiability, the credibility of a consensus intelligence community conclusion that Russian hacking was involved in the 2016 election. It took weeks upon weeks for President-elect Trump to acknowledge that. He finally did it at his one and only press conference before becoming president of the United States. But he said he went to the CIA, got an ecstatic reception there, and that reporters should understand that the CIA is standing essentially in lockstep with this president as they go forward. It was, in every respect, a stern, almost tongue-lashing of reporters for the way reporters have generally dealt with this administration, and we are only into this new administration for the second day. A couple of calendar items to keep in mind. British Prime Minister Theresa May will be here late this coming week for a visit at the White House with the president, and there was a couple of interesting phone calls today with the leader of Mexico, Peña Nieto, and the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Those conversations very well could lead to meetings, and they will certainly lead to conversations between the president and his top advisors on one of President Trump's top trade priorities, which is the rapid renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which involves, of course, Canada and Mexico. DeMarco.
All right, Major, we know the president was attending the National Day of Prayer service earlier, and just 2 miles away from there, you had hundreds, thousands of people who were there participating in the Women's March there and across the country and across the entire world. Have we got a sense of his thoughts about what took place today?
No, none whatsoever. As a matter of fact, as Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, turned on his heels and walked out of this James S. Brady briefing room, we all shouted questions at him about the president's reaction or the administration's reaction to the Women's March today. One thing that Sean Spicer did try to assert is that nobody knows how many people were here either for the inauguration or for the Women's March because the National Park Service doesn't provide numbers estimating crowd sizes anymore. It doesn't because there are so many controversies have arisen previously when the National Park Service tried to do that and got criticism for whatever estimate they put forward. So the National Park Service no longer does that. That is an actual factual statement. But that doesn't mean people can't draw their own conclusions from the photography of today's marches, not just in Washington, but Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, even in places outside of the United States, or the photographs they saw for yesterday's inaugural events. People can draw their own conclusions. What Sean Spicer was trying to suggest is that the media was trying to drive those conclusions in a certain direction to undermine, in his words, shamelessly undermine the enthusiasm President Trump encountered on Inauguration Day. It is quite clear this administration will make whatever representations it wants to on its impression and interpretation of the news, and then drive that right back to the news media if it thinks it is either being unfair or inflicting damage on the image this White House wants to portray. That became clear, if it wasn't already, in this statement from Sean Spicer just a couple of moments ago.
And Major, I know you have to go, but just a final quick question for you. You've covered the White House, you've covered Washington for quite some time now. Have you ever seen a press secretary this early on handle a press conference, a briefing like this? And it appears to have been a very short briefing.
Yes, and like I said, it wasn't a briefing in any traditional sense, because in a briefing, there are statements from the White House press secretary, and then there's a chance for questions. Sometimes it's on camera, commonly it is. Oftentimes it's done off camera, either here or in the press secretary's office. I've done it all those various ways. No questions from reporters today, just an assertion of this administration's interpretation of facts. I know we will have a briefing on Monday where there will be a chance for a give and take, but to your question, I've never seen anything like this where it was so intense, so harsh, and so passionate right off the beginning, and so much of it was about what the media got wrong from the interpretation of this White House, and a declaration that this antagonism is going to continue because this president believes he is duty-bound on behalf of this movement that Sean Spicer talked about to speak beyond the media and criticize it whenever he feels he is justified in doing so.
All right, our chief White House correspondent, Major Garrett. Major, as always, thank you so much for your reporting there.
Sure.
All right, folks, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more here on CBSN. Stay with us.